Plum. The European plum started as an accident. Its wild ancestor, the cherry plum, grows across Georgia, Azerbaijan, and eastern Turkey, and at some point thousands of years ago, it cross-pollinated naturally with the blackthorn shrub growing alongside it. The hybrid that resulted was hardier, fleshier, and sweeter than either parent. That was the plum. Roman writers, including Pliny the Elder, were cataloging dozens of varieties by the 1st century, which tells you how fast it spread once people realized what they had. But the plum's most interesting chapter came centuries later during the Crusades. Benedictine monks returning from Syria brought back a plum variety nobody in France had seen before, grafted it onto local rootstock in the town of Agen, and accidentally created the finest prune-making plum in the world. The Agen prune shaped French agriculture for centuries. Then in 1856, a French immigrant named Louis Pellier carried cuttings of that same variety across the Atlantic, packed in wet clay to keep them alive, and planted them in California. California now grows the majority of the world's prunes from trees descended directly from those cuttings. Not every plum becomes a prune. The sugar content must be high enough that the flesh dries without fermenting around the stone. For centuries, dried plums were sold in European pharmacies as a laxative, so routinely that the word prune became medically synonymous with digestion long before anyone found a better solution. Apricot. The Romans named the apricot after the wrong country, and the mistake has lasted 2,000 years. The botanical name is Prunus armeniaca, Armenian plum, because Roman traders encountered it coming through Armenia and assumed that was where it came from. It was not. DNA analysis of wild and cultivated apricot populations traces the origin to northwestern China and the Tian Shan Mountains of Central Asia, where wild apricots still grow today. The fruit moved west through Persia, through the Caucasus, through Armenia, and arrived in Rome in the 1st century BC. Armenia was just the last stop the Romans recognized. The error got locked into the scientific name and never corrected. The Romans did notice one thing accurately. The apricot ripened earlier than every other stone fruit they knew. They called it praecocum, meaning the early one, the precocious one. That word then passed into Arabic as albark, into Portuguese as albaricoque, into Spanish as albaricoque, and eventually into English as apricot. A 1,000-year journey through 5 languages before the name settled. Inside the stone is a kernel that contains amygdalin, a compound the body converts to hydrogen cyanide. In small amounts, it has been used in Chinese medicine for centuries. Dried apricots are a different matter, concentrating iron, beta-carotene, and potassium into a fraction of the original size while the sugar content climbs dramatically. One of the most nutrient-dense things you can carry in a pocket, jujube. Most people in the West have never heard of the jujube. In China, it has been farmed for at least 4,000 years and shows signs of domestication going back 7,000 years, placing it among the oldest cultivated fruit trees ever recorded. China produces over 98% of the global supply, which is why it never needed to market itself elsewhere. Fresh jujubes are eaten while still firm and partially green. At that stage, they taste like a crisp apple with floral and vanilla notes. Nothing like what most people expect from a fruit called the Chinese date. Let them ripen fully and dry out, and the transformation is dramatic. Sweet, wrinkled, chewy, and genuinely date-like, despite coming from a completely unrelated botanical family. The vitamin C content is staggering, 70 to 100 times more per gram than apples or grapes. Classical Chinese medicine texts prescribed jujubes for immunity, sleep disorders, and anxiety going back 2 millennia. In Taoist philosophy, the jujube is sacred, described in some texts as the food consumed by Xian, the immortals, the perfected ones. The tree earns that reverence practically too. It tolerates temperatures from -25 to +52 degrees Celsius. It survives drought, alkaline soil, and salt conditions that destroy every other orchard crop. It produces fruit in landscapes where conventional farming is impossible. For thousands of years across the arid interior of China and Central Asia, the jujube was not a delicacy. It was a survival tool. Persimmon. The botanical name for the persimmon genus is Diospyros, from the Greek for divine and grain, the fruit of Zeus. That is a significant thing to name something. Cultivated in China for over 2,000 years, introduced to Japan in the 7th century AD, the persimmon became Japan's national fruit and one of its most culturally loaded foods, depicted in ink paintings, written into haiku, and tied to autumn the way the cherry blossom is tied to spring. Japanese breeders spent centuries selecting away from that, developing non-astringent varieties called amagaki, meaning sweet persimmon, that can be eaten crisp and firm like an apple without any waiting. Those varieties now dominate commercial cultivation worldwide. When Commodore Matthew Perry opened Japan to Western trade in the 1850s, his crew returned with with persimmon cuttings that eventually shaped American cultivation of the fruit. The most extraordinary thing done with a persimmon, though, happens in Japan every autumn. The hoshigaki is a dried persimmon made by peeling whole fruits, hanging them from the rafters, and massaging each one by hand every few days for 6 weeks. The massage gradually breaks down the internal cell walls, drawing sugars outward until they crystallize on the surface as a white bloom that looks like frost. Each one is made by hand. A single farm produces only a few thousand per season. They sell for several dollars each, and the people who make them have been doing it the same way for hundreds of years. Dates are 7,000 years old as a crop, possibly older. Archaeological evidence from Sumerian sites in Mesopotamia, modern Iraq, shows date palm cultivation already fully established by 5000 BC, and some estimates push domestication back another 2,000 years before that. The date palm appeared on coins, on cylinder seals, in temple carvings, and in religious texts across the ancient Middle East. The stylized tree of life in Assyrian relief sculpture, the vertical palm flanked by winged figures, is now widely understood to represent a date palm. It was not a symbolic decoration. It was a portrait of the most important crop in the region. Dried dates contain over 80% sugar by weight, glucose, fructose, and sucrose, packed into a fruit small enough to carry in a pouch. For desert peoples crossing hundreds of miles between water sources, that caloric density was the difference between surviving and not. A single mature palm produces between 100 and 400 pounds of fruit per year and lives for over a century. Then there is Methuselah. In 2005, Israeli botanist Elaine Soloway germinated a date palm seed recovered from excavations at the fortress of Masada, carbon dated to approximately 2,000 years old, making it the oldest seed ever successfully germinated. The tree grew at Kibbutz Keturah in the Negev desert, produced viable pollen, and was used to fertilize a modern female palm. Fruit grew from a lineage that had been extinct since the Roman siege of Masada in 73 AD. A 2,000-year-old tree brought back because someone kept a seed. Mango. 3 countries claim the mango as their national fruit. India, Pakistan, and the Philippines all hold that designation simultaneously, the only fruit on earth with that distinction across 3 separate nations. That alone tells you something about how deeply the mango embedded itself across Asia. The cultivation history stretches back over 4,000 years to the foothills of the Himalayas along what is now the India-Myanmar border, where wild Mangifera indica still grows in the forest. In Buddhist texts, mango groves are described as meditation sites. The Buddha himself is placed beneath a mango tree in the Pali scriptures. The Mughal Emperor Akbar took it further. He reportedly ordered an orchard of 100,000 mango trees planted at Darbhanga in what is now Bihar, a grove called Laki Bagh, which translates simply as the 100,000 garden. Portuguese traders spread the mango to Africa and Brazil in the 16th century, following the slave trade routes westward. It naturalized so completely in Brazil that many people assume it is native there. India alone contains more named mango varieties than the rest of the world combined. Over 1,000 cultivars, ranging from the resinous bite of wild varieties to the honeyed, almost obscenely sweet Alfonso. The Alfonso grows only in the Ratnagiri and Devgad districts of Maharashtra's Konkan coast, is considered by many producers the finest mango variety in existence, and cannot be imported fresh into the United States due to phytosanitary regulations. Most Americans have never tasted one. They are missing something. Cherry. The cherry's Latin name gives away its entire history before you even open a textbook. Prunus avium means plum of the birds, because birds were the reason wild cherries spread across Europe and Asia in the first place. They ate the fruit, flew elsewhere, and dropped the seed. The sweet cherry most people eat today descended from 2 wild species that hybridized naturally around the Black Sea and Caspian Sea thousands of years ago. The name cherry itself comes from Sarasis, a town on the Black Sea coast of what is now northern Turkey. Greek soldiers encountered cherries there, and the Roman general Lucullus, a man so famous for his extravagant banquets that his name became a word for luxury, reportedly brought cherry trees back to Rome from a military campaign around 74 BC. That one campaign, if the story holds, changed what Europe ate for the next 2 millennia. The Morello cherry, the dark sour variety used in Black Forest cake and in making maraschino, is so acidic that it is essentially inedible raw. The tart intensity that makes it unpleasant fresh is exactly what makes it irreplaceable in cooking. Then there is Japan's relationship with the cherry, which went in a completely different direction. The Some Yoshino, the variety behind every Hanami cherry blossom festival, was bred to produce almost no fruit at all, selected entirely for the flower. Every Some Yoshino tree in Japan is a clone, propagated by grafting, because the variety cannot reproduce from seed. The Japanese chose the blossom over the fruit and never looked back.